All right. So tonight we are super excited to have Alexandra Kuykendall with us. She is an author, a speaker, and a kitchen anthropologist. She is the author of several books, most notably a book called Loving My Actual Life. She is also one of the hosts of the Open Door Sisterhood podcast. Alexandra lives in Denver with her husband Derek and their 4 daughters. Her husband leads Providence Network, which is a transitional housing ministry to those that are coming out of homelessness. We are super excited to have you with us tonight. Please give Alexandra a warm welcome in the chat, everybody.
Thanks.
Alexandra, thank you so much for being here. A little backstory. So my sister does some work with Alexandra. For anyone who is listening, she pointed me to you, and I've been listening to your podcast, going around on your website, and I just think that you have a lot of wisdom and insight to bring. And I don't want to say this I don't take this in an offensive way, but you're also not 20. You know, you have some life experience.
I am not 20. That is true.
When people
I'm not offended by that. Truth.
That's good. That's good. So you have how many children do you have?
I have 4. So the oldest is 18. If that gives you kind of a ballpark on how old I am. Yes, all girls.
That's awesome. So you have 4 children. You've lived some more life than some of us on this call, and I feel like when people just hear from me, they're getting a very skewed, 28-year-old perspective on the world. So I'm just happy that you're with us and just going to bring some wisdom and nuance and insight to this whole discussion. So you are an author. You've written several books, right? And like Deb said, Loving My Actual Life, Loving My Actual Christmas, I think was the other one. And then you have one more in that trio, right?
Yes, Loving My Actual Neighbor.
Great. Yes. So I know from the little bit of people that I've talked to who write books nowadays, you basically have to be involved with social media at some level to be an author, to have an audience, all that stuff. Like, you used to be able to just go to publishers and they would kind of take care of everything for you. But from what I understand, it kind of is just part of the deal these days. So what has your experience been like with social media? Have you found it enriching? What are the highs and the lows just as you've sort of gotten more in depth in, the different places?
Yeah. Well, highs and lows is probably a good place to start. It is true that I don't feel like I can completely opt out. I don't feel like I can take a month off because the expectation from my publisher is that I'm on. And not everybody has that. So that's a little bit unusual. My husband is one of those people who he's not really on Facebook or Instagram because he's just not interested. So, we kind of have a range in our house of what's going on. So I would say highs is for sure connecting with people, because my view of social media is Jesus went where people were. So I want to go where people are. And I use that term kitchen anthropologist because I don't have a lot of credentials. I'm not a pastor, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a psychologist, but I stand in my kitchen and I try to make sense of the world. And a lot of the time that's through a screen. It's through my laptop, it's through my phone. And I want to know what people are talking about. And it's a tool for me to enter into conversations. So that's, I would say, the high point is getting into conversations I wouldn't normally be in were it not for social media. The low is I am one of those people where my temptation is the escape. I don't want to deal with the dishes. I don't want to deal with whatever it is, the edits. It usually has to do with housework in my case. I don't want to clean the house. So I'm just going to look at everybody else's beautiful pictures of their lives. And that's going to be, their vacations, their awesome Christmas gifts. And then I look up from my phone at my actual life, and the dishes are still dirty and the kids are still cranky and I still don't know what's for dinner. And we have this weird comparison with everybody else's highlight reel with our actual pain and our grief. And especially if we are trying to avoid that pain and grief, and that's why we're reaching for the phone, then we can feel that amplified in. And so I think that those are the highs and lows for me.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. How much do you feel like you are affected by the highlight reel? How much does that get you down and you're just feeling low? Like, man, these people look like they're just having such great times, and maybe I don't feel that same way.
Well, if I'm totally honest, you said this is a place of honesty. Sometimes I'm just annoyed. Like, really, come on. Your house is not that clean. Your house, because I know I've lived enough life to know, like, you really don't wake up with that much makeup on. I just know that, you probably don't follow a lot of women, but I follow a lot of women. So sometimes I'm just annoyed by that. But I do get probably most self-conscious around people whose lives I think should look similar to mine. So as an author, I look at how many other followers people have, how engaged her readers are. And I think, what, am I not putting anything great out there? Why isn't anybody liking this or commenting on this? Or as a mom, I can start to compare, like, oh, wow, that looks like an amazing vacation. And our vacation is a non-vacation this year. And so I think for me, more than maybe body image or pornography, those aren't my areas of temptation. I certainly have friends with those areas. Mine just have to do with more probably lifestyle. And again, because my house is a challenge for me, I often look at the background. I'm like, how is it so clean back there? I don't get it. So and that's my pain point, right? We compare where our pain point is. And that probably isn't your pain point. But if you think about, where am I insecure? That is where Satan's going to kind of come in and say, oh, look at how awesome. It's like this funnel, how awesome this person's highlight reel is in that particular area, because we're going to zone in on it, and that insecurity is going to get amplified.
No, that's so true. It's not the same for everyone. Not everyone is going to struggle in the same exact way. And we would say, like, as Christians, right, we believe there's God, but then there's a source of evil, right? So Satan, the figure in the Bible who is called the accuser, and basically points to us and, like, exactly like you said, finds the weak area and exploits them. And social media has so many opportunities to do that with every person's individual weak spot. And I think that, for me, I'm realizing more and more when I think about social media usage, and I think about children, young people today who are just growing up with it, that it's like you are throwing people into the lion's den, right? Like, this is the most potential for harm. And there's a lot of people on social media, not just kids, but adults, who aren't really fully developed enough to be able to say, I can wade through these waters. Mm-hmm. So we have some very, very young people on this call. Some of them, a friend of mine, he just told me he's 19. I thought he was like 23, but he's 19. So he was born in the early 2000s. So from your perspective, what has changed, like, when you think about life pre-social media and then post-social media? Do you feel like in your own life, and just maybe more broadly, has this made things better or made things worse? Like, when you just compare, raising children or whatever it is, pre and post, how do you feel like you've seen a change, especially for the people on the call who literally do not remember because they weren't alive?
Yeah. Well, I would say devices in general, not just social media, but social media is a way to hook us on the device. Device use in general is just a different experience. I mean, I didn't have a cell phone until I was in my mid to late 20s. And so I didn't even have a phone that I carried with me. I went places and my mom didn't know where I was and couldn't track me, kind of thing. And so teenagers now, their parents have that ability to do that. We as parents have chosen not to do that with our teenagers, because we want to give them that opportunity to go explore the world without the helicopters. But they also, as far as we know, have stayed within our boundaries as far as rules. But it's just a different experience, I think, for kids, just screens in general. And then social media can be that. I don't think it's all bad. I think we know a lot more about people's in and outs sometimes. We know more about maybe what they believe, how they vote, how, depending on who you're friends with and what they post, you could know what time they brush their teeth. I mean, there are some people who post things that I think I really don't need to know that, but they offer you the opportunity to know that. So in that sense, you're in many ways involved in people's intimate details. But I think what's interesting is that we used to have conversations with people really only face to face. And when you are in somebody's presence, you are required to treat them. Maybe you're not required, but it's expected. People just tend to behave better when they are in person than when you're on a screen and you are able to say things that maybe you wouldn't say to someone's face. Well, then add in that maybe all the people that you're communicating with on a certain platform are strangers. All of a sudden, you have the ability to say things that you would never say to a real person. And so that can get vicious and nasty really fast. And I would say that is a huge change that social media has impacted our culture in general, is that we've tended to get a little more nasty and have a little more gotcha than we used to when we disagreed with someone.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, those changes I think are all huge and have affected, the culture so much. So my sister, she forwarded me one of your emails from your email list, and you were talking about a exchange that you went through with a Facebook group, and it was kind of like a contentious discussion, and you normally would have refrained, but you're like, no, I want to defend this person. Could you talk through just that story and kind of what you learned from it?
Sure. So in the spirit of, I want to be part of the conversation, and this is where the conversation is happening, I am part of a neighborhood moms Facebook group. So when it started, Facebook didn't even exist. My daughter was 6 months old. It was an email list. Okay. We got like a daily log. We were like on an AOL board or something. I don't know. You probably don't know.
I love that.
Yeah. And so it's grown, and now there's about 5,000, 6,000 parents that all live in our part of Denver. So we live in the city. And so I like to be part of it because I like to be part of the conversation. I like to know what my neighbors are thinking. It helps me better care for them. It helps me better care about elections. It helps me better care about schools. It helps me better care about lots of things that impact my neighbors when I hear their perspectives and know what's going on. So somebody posted a question that was asking for information about something happening in one of the local elementary schools. And she, in my opinion, got attacked for even asking the question, that questions were off limits. This is happening. Nobody should question it. It's good. And it got really nasty really fast. And then the whole thread got deleted. A second thread was started because people were mad that the original poster who got attacked deleted her thread. And so it started then becoming more of a conversation around what's an appropriate way for us to interact in this group. And I thought, okay, I have some opinions about this. And now I am kind of the old mom in the group. So I do have some wisdom. And so I was able to enter the conversation through the content that was being debated to say, I have some experience with this. And it was presented in a way that I was almost an ally to the people who'd been attacking her. And so they saw me in a kinship role, and that they understood that maybe I actually agreed with them on the issue. It's just I didn't agree with how they attacked her. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so when I entered as a friend on the topic, it then got, they wanted me to come under their umbrella of you're on our team. And I was like, no, I'm not on your team because I don't like the way you're treating her. And so then it became a discussion of how do we do this? Well, what I didn't know is that one of my older daughters babysat for this original poster a couple summers ago. And she thought, I think, that I knew who she was and that I was defending her because of friendship. I really didn't recognize her at all. I just thought this is wrong, and I am a good and right person at this moment to step in and talk about this. And so she texted me the next day on my phone and thanked me for standing up for her, in a sense. And so it highlighted to me, in a forum like this, where you think you may be dealing with strangers, people you know are actually being impacted by your words. And what I realized and remembered in that moment is that I needed to constantly check myself, because I wanted to meet snark with snark. Like, if you're going to say that to me that way, oh no, I can play that game. I mean, and that is my sinful nature. I wanted to defend myself while I was defending her. And in that, I was matching their poor behavior. And so I really had to stop myself a lot and just say, I don't need to hit publish right now. I can just take a moment. I can walk away. I walked away a number of times that evening from the computer, came back so that I made sure I was saying it the way I wanted to, with the tone I wanted to. And I used lots of I statements because I know, I mean, it's just basic communication applied to social media, that de-escalates things, to say, oh, I understood you to say this, or I must have misunderstood, or I must have read wrong your tone, because it is hard to read tone when you can't see body language. And then to remember that everybody wants to be understood. I mean, that's really there. When I kept thinking, what are people's hearts right here? What is the ache? Because I could feel the ache and the angst happening just in their spirits, and to recognize that and say, they're longing to be known. And that's how we're wired, because God made us to long to be known by him. And when we go to social media to fill that void, obviously we're going to be disappointed and those yucky feelings are going to come out. But to remember, this wasn't a Christian platform and I didn't bring Christ by name into it. My goal was to bring the aroma of Christ into it. He is gentle. He is going to give me a spirit of self-control, of gentleness, of kindness, of patience. I want that to be evident when I'm interacting with people. And then when I come back and read it tomorrow, I want to be convinced that I don't have any regrets, that was evident in my response to people.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And that takes, I can imagine, a tremendous amount of strength to refrain from meeting the snark with the snark, right? Just totally meeting people at their level, coming up with the thing, this is going to totally, end the conversation or whatever, right? It takes so much self-control to be able to stop, think about it, and come up with a Christ-like response, which so many Christians, especially since the platforms themselves reward the more controversial that you can be, right? That's anything that's going to keep people engaged. And they found that when people are more engaged when they're engaged in conflict. So the platforms reward the exact opposite behavior, which I think goes back to my original point that a lot of us maybe feel like I'm the strong brother or the strong sibling that Paul is talking about, when it's like, actually, probably most of us are not going to be responding in a Christ-like way in that environment. And maybe it's even worth pulling out. So we actually got a good question in the chat. So I'm going to, this is from Mike Spangler. He said, do either of you have any tips for navigating the instant gratification nature of social media sites? I found that the quick feedback of social media sites is one of the things that make me want to go to it when things are slow or boring in my life. I said a couple in my talk, but I would love to hear if you have any that you'd like to share.
Yeah, well, I write about this in my book, Loving My Actual Life, in that I did take a social media fast for a month as part of the experiment that I write about in that book. And it just made me more aware of when I grab for my phone and why I grab for it. So I think just even taking a break, because then every time you have that impulse, for me, it's at a stoplight, it's in the kitchen, wherever it is, where I'm just having 20 seconds of nothing and I'm trying to grab for my phone. If the phone is off limits, to say, okay, why? And it gets to that part of sitting with our own discomfort, which is probably not what Mike's looking for as far as recommendations, because it's not fun. But we're trying to overcome, right? If we're trying to overcome the boring, we're trying to overcome the thing we don't want to deal with, the taxes or whatever it is, the phone call we have to make that's going to be difficult. I would much rather look at somebody else's Twitter feed than do that. I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, this is why I am doing that. And then not to sound overly spiritual, but to go to God and say, this is pushing me away from you, as you said earlier, and I want to be coming to you with this stress. And maybe the boredom, there's something deeper in there. It's loneliness, or it's insignificance, or it's monotony. I mean, to kind of peel back those layers, and that's not fun, and it's not fast, and it's not easy. So it's not really a great counter to the fast, easy, and fun that social media can provide quickly. One tip that I heard Shauna Niequist say years ago is that every time she felt tempted to go out of that boredom or just mindless scrolling and reach for her phone, she would reach for her phone and she would text a real person instead and say, just thinking of you. And so she would ask, I mean, I don't know, I'm starting to assume some things. Maybe she would ask God, put a person on my heart, but she would text a real friend that she thought, this would be a way for me to use my phone in a real connection. And maybe it's private messaging somebody through that social media platform, but to have actual connection instead of just scrolling.
No, that's so helpful. Devin said, love that suggestion. I think that's really good. Annie Kim, she says, for me, once I start, it's hard to stop. So cold turkey works best for me. I struggle not with social media, but watching too much TV. I'm with you sometimes there, Annie. So now I'm only watching TV Fridays and Saturdays and no TV the rest of the week. I've actually heard other people say that they only will watch Netflix or anything if it's with friends. So they say, I'll engage in these. I'm not going to just binge a million episodes. I'm going to do it as a community activity. Hey, we are going to come over and watch this show together, which I thought was a really good idea. Just right before we run out of time, speak a little bit. We were talking about the importance before we got on kind of just having nuance in conversations, and social media is not the most helpful to have nuanced conversations, and that's a big value for us in this community of being able to talk through the different sides of an issue and not just black and white. Here's what my pastor said, or here's whatever, but actually wrestling through it. Do you feel like it's a worthwhile, like after that whole experience that you went through on the Facebook, is it a worthwhile endeavor to push for having nuanced conversations, or is it better to just push it off and say, let's talk on the phone, or does that make sense? What would be your thought on that?
I think it depends on what your goal is. With strangers, I would say if you are having a posture of learning because you truly want to understand somebody who thinks about something differently than you do, then trying to have those nuanced conversations because that's the place where the conversation is happening with that stranger, yeah, sure, try it. What I found is that a few people I know in real life were watching this Facebook situation unfold and private messaged me, and I have since had very extensive conversations with them one-on-one. So it's a good starting place to then move the conversation to another platform, which in my case, it was email. Someone was like, oh, I got a lot to say about this. So they emailed me, and then we could have this more personal, more intimate conversation. I mean, the ideal is to be in people's presence. That's a little harder right now. And it's just harder in general because people are busy under normal circumstances. But if you can, that's the ideal. So I would say, yeah, we are meant to be the light of the world, and that's in all places. So if that's entering into a contentious discussion, or entering into what you think this is more common, an innocent one, and then it goes wonky, to continue to say, Jesus, how am I the light of the world in this situation?
No, that's really good. That's really good. Thank you so much for coming on. How can people find you? What's the best way to hear more about what you're up to? Maybe check out one of your books or listen to your podcast. What's like the best place for people to find you?
Sure. Well, Instagram is good.
That's good.
Speaking of social media, you can message me on there. But my website is my name, Alexandra Kuykendall. You just have to spell it right, .com.
No, that's great. That's great. If someone really gung-ho wants to drop that in the chat, type it up, please do. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure this was very helpful for a lot of people. It was very helpful for me. I'm going to use some of those suggestions, and I think it's just a really good way to frame the whole conversation.